Los Angeles, California, 1991. Two friends who had known each other since the 6th grade, Zach De La Rocha and Tim Comerford, meet a drummer named John Knox. Knox told them that his old bandmate, Tom Morello, was looking to start a new band after their old band, Lock Up, had broken up. Morello invited De La Rocha and Comerford, as well as a drummer named Brad Wilk, for a jam session. De La Rocha and Comerford actually used to be in a band together back in junior high, but other than that, the four had never played together before. The jam session turned into multiple jam sessions, and the next thing you know, they had a band. De La Rocha would be the vocalist and provide the lyrics, which would undoubtedly be politically charged most of the time. By the way, he had been in multiple bands before this. Morello would play guitar, Comerford would play bass, Wilk would play drums. They named themselves Rage Against the Machine. Apparently that name was originally supposed to be the name of a song, an album De La Rocha had written for his previous band, Inside Out. Apparently this dude, named Kent McClard, also coined the phrase in a 1989 article in his zine called No Answers. Regardless, over the years, many of their fans would come to view, quote, the Machine, as any system or organization that was responsible for injustice in the world. Rage Against the Machine ended up being a pretty fitting name. Their first performance was in, quote, somebody's living room in Orange County, California. After that, they quickly gained a following. Not wasting any time, they recorded a 12-song demo, releasing it on cassette tape in December 1991. Throughout early 1992, the band sold the tape for $5 at their live shows, eventually selling more than 5,000 copies of them. Oh, by the way, if you have one of them, you might want to hold on to it. I saw one sold online for hundreds of dollars. Anyway, the artwork featured images of stock market reports with a single match. The band also printed the statement, quote, no samples, keyboards, or synthesizers used in the making of this recording, which would be printed on all later recordings they released. In the liner notes, they also referred to themselves as, quote, guilty parties, which would also be printed for all later recordings they released. Oh, and they also sent the demo album to many major record labels, and while several wanted to sign them, they ended up signing with Epic Records. In April, they recorded their debut album at Sound City Studios in LA. They ended up re-recording 7 of the 12 songs that were on their demo. De La Rocha wrote the lyrics, which were obviously politically motivated and attacked multinational corporations, cultural imperialism, and government oppression. They seemed to represent a leftist voice that had become less prominent in the 1990s. Tom Morello's guitar work was inventive, to say the least. In the studio, he was constantly experimenting with the weird new sounds his guitars could make. Garth Richardson produced. After leaving the studio, the band hit the road, playing a notable show opening for Porno for Pyros at one of their first ever gigs. In October, they toured Europe, and by that time, the hype for them was already building. Epic released their self-titled debut studio album on November 3rd, 1992. The cover featured part of the famous Malcolm Brown 1963 photograph of the Vietnamese monk Thich Quang Duc burning himself to death at a busy Saigon intersection to protest the persecution of Buddhists by the South Vietnamese government. The first single, Killing in the Name, ended up being a huge radio hit. The song is quite notable. First of all, Morello wrote its guitar riffs back when he was teaching a student drop D tuning on the guitar. He paused the lesson with the student to record the riff so he wouldn't forget it later on. Regarding the lyrics, there are only 8 different lines, but yeah, the uncensored version of it contains the F word 17 times. Later, a BBC Radio 1 DJ named Bruno Brooks played that uncensored version on his Top 40 Singles Countdown show. Oops. The song was about police corruption. De La Rocha was inspired to write the song based on what happened to Rodney King, who was a victim of police brutality. That ended up leading to some major riots in Los Angeles, and all that was just so happened happening to go down when the band was recording the album. But yeah, even though it was the band's very first single, nearly 30 years later, it remains the song they are best known for and holds up as a good introduction to what the band is all about. And don't forget the other 3 singles from their self-titled debut album, Bullet in the Head, Bomb Track, and Freedom. Critics praised the album, and it would go on to sell millions. Rolling Stone magazine later rated it as number 24 on their list of 100 greatest metal albums of all time. For the rest of 1992 and for most of 1993, Rage Against the Machine continued to tour to support the album. Notably, they had legendary performances at both Lollapalooza 2 in 1992 and Lollapalooza 3 in 1993. In 1994, the shows started to slow down, and there were already rumors swirling around that the band would be breaking up. However, they did record a new song, Year of the Boomerang, for the Higher Learning soundtrack. Throughout 1995, they were performing less and less, but they did organize and headline a benefit concert for Mumia Abu Jamal, an activist and journalist who had perhaps been wrongly accused of murder and put on death row. The show, held at the Capitol Ballroom in Washington, D.C., raised more than $8,000 for his supporters. Meanwhile, Rage Against the Machine was back in the studio. They recorded at Cole Rehearsal Studios in L.A. with producer Brendan O'Brien throughout most of 1995 and into early 1996. Out of these sessions came what would become their second studio album, Evil Empire, released by Epic on April 16, 1996. The title referred to a term used in the early 1980s by conservatives to describe the former Soviet Union. 3 days before its release, the band appeared on Saturday Night Live. Their 2-song performance, however, was cut to just 1 song after the band attempted to hang inverted American flags from their amplifiers to protest the conservative host Steve Forbes. Apparently, SNL executives were so upset by this that they kicked the band out of the building in Comerford, tore up the American flags, and threw them in Forbes' dressing room. Still, fans had waited 3.5 years for this album, and it debuted at number 1 on the US Billboard 200. The first single, Bulls on Parade, which features a memorable vinyl scratch effect solo by Tom Morello toggling between 2 pickups on his guitar, got heavy airplay on alternative rock radio stations around the world. The song was a critique of American military spending. The video for the song did well on MTV's 120 Minutes and was later nominated for Best Hard Rock Video at the 1996 MTV Video Music Awards. Evil Empire had 2 additional singles, People of the Sun and Viet Now. The song Tire Me, even though it wasn't a single, went on to win a Grammy Award for Best Metal Performance. Down Rodeo, a song about wealth inequality, also got a bit of radio airplay. Critics also generally praised the album, and while it wasn't as successful as their self-titled debut, it still went on to sell millions. On June 16, 1996, the band played the Tibetan Freedom Concert in San Francisco. It was the largest American benefit concert since Live Aid. For the rest of the year and into 1997, they went on tour to support Evil Empire. In April 1997, they began a series of stadium concerts supporting the band U2. The band decided to donate their earnings from these performances to various activist organizations. In August, Rage Against the Machine began headlining an American tour of their own. It was during this tour that many police organizations unsuccessfully tried to get their concerts canceled because of the band's, quote, violent and anti-law enforcement philosophies. In late 1997, alternative rock stations began playing The Ghost of Tom Joad, a cover song by the band, originally written by Bruce Springsteen. On February 12, 1998, the band released a new single called No Shelter. It later appeared on the Godzilla soundtrack and also got got some radio airplay. Despite it being a song critical of consumerism and mass media's influence on young people, the song ironically promoted a film and commercially did quite well. Some critics said that with the release of the song, the band had sold out. Regardless, the band kept on keeping on. On June 30th, Sony released an album called Live and Rare, which featured, live songs and rare songs by them. You know, B-sides and stuff. Shortly after that, the band returned to the studio to record their third studio album. Brendan O'Brien returned to produce. They wrapped up recording in the fall, but it'd be a full year before the next album's release. In the meantime, they kept playing shows throughout 1999. On January 28th, they organized and headlined another benefit show for Mumia Abu-Jamal, but this time it seemed to be more controversial for some reason. In April, De La Rocha spoke before the International Commission of Human Rights of the United Nations on Abu-Jamal's behalf, calling for the end of the death penalty. In June, the band played another Tibetan freedom concert, but more famously, or infamously, they performed at Woodstock 99 on July 25th. Woodstock 99 demonstrated the rise of the nu metal genre, and Rage Against the Machine ended up sort of raging against that machine too, if you know what I mean. They weren't too impressed with bands like Limp Bizkit. On October 10th, the band headlined the first ever Coachella Festival in Indio, California. And then, finally, on November 2nd, Epic released their third studio album, The Battle of Los Angeles. It also debuted at number 1 on the US Billboard 200, and critics adored it. And with more hits on the radio, Rage Against the Machine were 3 for 3. The biggest single was Guerrilla Radio, which ended up winning the band another Grammy Award for Best Hard Rock Performance. 2 other singles off the Battle of Los Angeles, Sleep Now in the Fire and Testify, also got a lot of airplay on alternative rock stations around the world. The left-leaning documentary filmmaker and activist Michael Moore actually directed the music videos for both songs. In fact, while shooting the video for Sleep Now in the Fire, the band actually did cause the doors of the New York Stock Exchange to be closed, and they really were escorted out of there by security after they tried to sneak in. Hundreds of fans had shown up, and you could argue this was the precursor to the later Occupy Wall Street movement. Anyway, the Battle of Los Angeles also went on to sell millions, and at the beginning of 2000, right when the band seemed to be at the peak of their popularity, it all began to quickly unravel. First, De La Rocha announced plans for a solo project. Next, the band was just having a hard time getting along, and when they weren't performing, were constantly fighting. And then, that summer, the band sadly had their tour with the Beastie Boys canceled after one of their members, Mike D, injured his shoulder. Still, it was a presidential election year, and the band felt it important that they stay together and play a few more shows until the election. In August, the band played a free show for MTV immediately outside of the 2000 Democratic National Convention, but the show was highly restricted and almost shut down by local authorities. On September 7th, the band performed their hit Testify at the 2000 MTV Video Music Awards. Now, their music video for Sleep Now in the Fire, remember the one where they got escorted out of Wall Street? Well, that one was nominated for Best Rock Video. However, after Limp Bizkit's video for their song Break Stuff won instead, Tim Comerford climbed onto the scaffolding of the set to protest. He ended up getting arrested for disorderly conduct because of the stunt. In fact, Comerford had told De La Rocha and Morello before the ceremony that he was going to do it, and both De La Rocha and Morello tried to talk him out of it. De La Rocha was apparently pretty embarrassed by it. Rage Against the Machine did play some more shows in September, but that would be it. As on October 18th, De La Rocha announced he had left the band, saying, quote, "I feel that it is now necessary to leave Rage because our decision-making process has completely failed. It is no longer meeting the aspirations of all 4 of us collectively as a band, and from my perspective, has undermined our artistic and political ideal," unquote. De La Rocha said he was pursuing solo work, but since his departure, he has mostly favored activism over music. Meanwhile, the rest of the band decided to stick together but form a new band with another singer. That singer ended up being the Chris Cornell from the legendary grunge band Soundgarden, which had broken up 3 years prior. The new band was called Audioslave, and they ended up having a pretty successful run as well as a supergroup. But Rage Against the Machine did release a fourth studio album, even though it was just a covers album. That said, Renegades, released by Epic on December 5th, 2000, ended up being one of the most successful and critically acclaimed cover albums of all time. It reached number 14 on the US Billboard 200. The biggest hit off the album was Renegades of Funk, performed originally by Africa Bambaataa. In 2003, Tom Morello started a solo career under the alias The Night Watchman. Over the years, the former members of Rage Against the Machine have often been given lucrative offers to reunite, but more often than not have turned them down. However, there have been exceptions. In 2007, they reunited to play the closing day of the Coachella Festival. That felt pretty good to them, so they went ahead and played a few more shows around the world in 2008. And guess what? 2008 was an election year, so they kind of kept going right up until the election. In August, during the Democratic National Convention in Denver, they headlined the 10th State Music Festival to End the War, a protest show against the Iraq War. After the show, the band followed Iraq War veterans to the convention, and after a 4-hour standoff with the police, were finally able to meet with then presidential nominee Barack Obama. Later, they performed near the Republican National Convention. The previous day, they tried to play a free anti-Republican National Convention show nearby, but police cut that one short. By December, reunion shows were winding down, and it didn't seem like the band was planning on recording any new material anytime soon. A year later, a grassroots internet campaign to prevent hits from the reality show The X Factor from yet again reaching number 1 on the UK singles chart at Christmas was successful when they instead got Rage Against the Machine's Killing in the Name to the top of the chart. And holy crap, this happened.
We wrote Killing the Name in a small industrial slum in Los Angeles. The X Factor song was written by a cabal of overpaid songwriters to shove that schmaltzy business down your throats.
On December 17th, 2009, the BBC 5 Live Breakfast Show featured the band playing the song live, where of course they dropped some of the F-bombs live on the air. Oops. Afterward, Rage Against the Machine played a free concert to celebrate at Finsbury Park on June 6th, 2010. That show was later released as a video album. Since 2009, lots of rumors have swirled around a 5th album from the band, but that has yet to happen. They've played a handful of shows here and there, but no tours. For 10 years, they have basically been back on hiatus. However, that all changes next March, as the band will be reuniting once again with the Public Service Announcement Tour. Now, this tour was originally supposed to happen in March 2020, but you know, the COVID-19 pandemic happened, so they had to push it back a couple years. Oh, and something else that is important to mention. Tom Morello, Tim Comerford, and Brad Wilk never really broke up. They have continued to consistently play together over the years, with their latest band being Prophets of Rage. Despite only the 4 members of Rage Against the Machine being together for 9, okay, maybe 12 years, today the band remains more influential than ever. One reason why is because they have defied all genres. Sure, they have been labeled by journalists as a mix of hardcore punk, heavy metal, rap, and funk, but Rage Against the Machine is a genre. Few bands sound like them. Few bands look like them, but more importantly, few bands have had such laser-focused political messages with their lyrics. Every song is a protest song against the establishment, or I guess, against the machine. And as long as there is injustice and oppressed people, there is a strong need for this band. In fact, there's a comfort in knowing this rage exists. This video is dedicated to Nolan Rogers, my amazing former student. Rage Against the Machine is his favorite band, and they are also one of my favorite bands, despite only releasing 4 studio albums. I think they're even a big reason why I first got interested in politics, to be honest. Anyway, do any of you plan on seeing them on their reunion tour? Also, which band should I do a brief history of next? Let me know down below, and thanks for watching.